All right, welcome everybody. My name is Andy Goddard, and really excited about what we get to dive into today. I don't know how many of you have read any of the work by Brené Brown. She is a pioneer in her space, but I've been working with one of my favorite authors and also one of my mentors and coaches, Brett Harward. And as we're both reading Brené's work, we realized, oh my gosh, like this is exactly the work that Brett's been doing in a personal development space. He runs a training called BU, and this is exactly what the training is all about. It's vulnerability work. It's processing shame. It's processing the guilt and the layers of stories that we create around our past, around our identity. So I've invited Brett to join us, and there he is. Welcome, Brett. I think you're muted.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I've
Okay.
been listening. I haven't been on. I've been watching you. So
Awesome. So Brett and I have both been rolling around in this concept and this space for over a decade, and we're just thrilled to take a message that is so powerful and so pertinent to our doTERRA family. So I've been in doTERRA for a few years. Brett's been in for a few years, and we just love our doTERRA peeps. And so let me give a little bit more background about the first Rumble that Brett and I hosted about a month ago here in Utah, and then the second Rumble that we hosted at the Blue and Presidential Summit in Hawaii. So
I'll run here so I don't bother you.
Oh, you're
So Brett and I, we invited a really small group of people to come together in person in Pleasant Grove, and we just set up 5 or 6 hours to get together and do a deep dive into what are the armor, the ways that we get triggered and we put up our armor, and what are the ways that we create stories around our worth and our weight. And Brett, I'm just going to mute you until we get until I bring you on. So we had an incredible experience with a dozen or so top leaders, and then we decided this is the message that Natalie and I are feeling most called to. So we also took this to our Blue and Presidential Summit that we hosted in Hawaii about 10 days ago. So we created some experiences. It's not just like whiteboard learning where you learn about this cool concept. It's very experiential. And we've had some really positive feedback, and people told us it was exactly what they needed, and just life-changing stuff. So Brett, I told him a little bit about BU. I told him how that's actually how I met Brett. Was I went through this training 10 years ago, and it completely rocked my world. It was now that I went through it right as we were starting doTERRA, and it laid the foundation for how to show up in our relationships, and how to be authentic, how to be vulnerable, and really deeply connect with people. So with that, Brett, why don't I turn it over to you, and let's dive into our first online leadership rumble.
All right. Well, this is going to be an interesting process. So we have not done one of these before. So we're learning as we go, and we're going to love feedback at the end of this. Here's what I love about this. One of the quotes Renee said that just really resonated with me, and it correlates with kind of one of my big life give backs is this training Andy talks about every couple months. I mean, it's not what I do for a living, but it's something that people come together from all over the world, and we'll have 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 people that come together, and we spend 4 days just kind of going through stuff and what are the things that drive them, and how does that show up in how they act and how they treat others and what they say and what offends them, and and a lot of the focus of it is all the stuff that we do that's all image, that where we're just trying to perfect or trying to promote this image, and all the energy that we put into this, it's all this unproductive energy. And when they get into it, they find that it's not a little bit of energy every day. It's the vast majority of the energy, which is why at the end of the day they're exhausted and tired, and they they spend so much time promoting how they want people to see them instead of what's real. So like an example would be someone who goes out and, they go out and they buy the expensive new car, and they have the expensive house, and they live above their means because they want people to think they're successful. But what's really going on behind the scenes is they're struggling and they're starving and they're barely keeping their heads above water, because looking successful is more important than actually being successful. And all their energy is going into looking successful. All the energy is going into looking like a good mom or looking like a good dad instead of being a good dad, instead of, being successful, instead of, so that's it. And in my mind, it's kind of how this vulnerability is a willingness to kind of let down the walls and the guard, and in being authentic and vulnerable to sharing what's going on and what you need and how others can support you and how you can support others, and creating a space. My favorite word from Renee's work that just resonated with me was this look on, or she calls it giving people the space to breathe, and how in our society now we're so tight and so tightly wound about how we have to look and what we're supposed to be, that we can't breathe. We can't let our guards down. We walk around with our shoulders tight and our jaws clenched, and we're just trying to survive the experience. And when you create this space of vulnerability on your teams and with the people you associate with, it's like this safe harbor. They can breathe, they can explore things, they can deal with what's real, so they can actually deal with the real stuff.
Doesn't she call that exhaling?
Yeah, exhaling. You can exhale. They can exhale.
Yeah.
They can just have this sigh,
Right.
and when you create the space around you where people can exhale, and they can breathe, and it just, they're safe, then great things start to happen, because you start to deal with the real stuff that's holding them back, instead of all the finger pointing and the blaming and the external things that aren't really the holdback. And so that's really for me, that's what this work is about. And that's kind of the today. And as we were talking, our objective, as Andy and I talked beforehand, was to, help create a space and teach some skills, so that you can, if you want to start exploring this vulnerability thing, and being a leader that can explore that on your team, and can hear people and see people for what they are, and talk about the hard things. And I'm working with a company. I was telling Andy a story. I'm working with a company today, and one of the gals in the office this morning, I was telling her we were going to do a webinar on vulnerability, and she said, "Isn't that a bad thing? Isn't that a bad thing?" And I said, No, it's not. That's one of the misunderstandings of vulnerability, is that it's weak or it's bad. And she said, I must not understand what it means. And so I told her, I said, it's, example in your work would be if you come in and you're having a rough time at work and you're showing up, you're coming in late, and it's not really how you show up, and you seem stressed out and you're forgetting things. I mean, it's one thing for your boss to come through and say, okay, this has to stop, or we're going to have to make a change. We're going to have to fire you. And that's one approach, or the approach of saying, so what's going on? This doesn't seem like you. What's happening? And it's not about digging into all the personal details of someone's life. But when someone says, I'm struggling right now, I am really, my wife and I, my husband and I'm having a really hard time, and I'm not sleeping well, and we're struggling. And to be able to say, I'm sorry that you're struggling. That's got to be hard. And then open up the vulnerable space, and then say, so what can we do? How can we support you? What can I do to support you? How can I, what's going on? And have the real conversations, because I can go all day long talking to them about what they need to do and how they need to be on time and how they got to get their schedule in. And I'm not going to get a high performing person when all that stuff's going on. Right. And so as a leader, when I can say, do you need some time off? I mean, how can I support you as a leader? And what's funny is simply having that on the table and the support, it will change their performance instantly, because they can come into work and they don't, rather than stuff it and hide it and try and pretend like everything's great, they can come in and say, man, I had a rough day yesterday, and I'm here and I'm ready to go. And it's like, and they can have all those things coexist without having to put on this brave face that, life is perfect. Everything's great, because that's what's draining all the energy is all that facade we put on. Right. So.
Totally. Hey, Brett, could you move your camera so we could see you?
Yes. Oh yeah. Sorry. There we go. I'm looking at I'm watching your slides and I'm saying, and I'm reading your slides. And it's sitting down on the table. I'm here. Sorry about that. We saw the lights though. The ceilings, the lights on the ceiling are really awesome, aren't they?
We thought you might be working through some shame around how
about my lack of hair. My baldness. I have some massive insecurities about being bald. So
one of the things too that I'm excited to create together is this conversation around doTERRA is really different from corporate America. It's not a clock in, clock out environment. It's a volunteer organization. People put in as much as they want, and you can't hire, you can't fire. All you can do is inspire. So
all you can do is drive people away.
That's right. So how do you see that relating to this conversation of vulnerability and the way we lead and have similar crucial conversations, but it's different, right? We can't take disciplinary action. We can't cut people's pay. How do you see that being different in this doTERRA space?
Well, so I see lots of places where this applies. And I have a word for it that Renee some kind of uses it. I love her wording. I love the concept of this arena and seeing people's potential. I mean, she talks a lot about leadership seeing people's potential and be willing to do the messy stuff to help them unlock that. And she calls it being in the arena. And it feels like that when you play in that, the second she says arena, if you're playing in that place in life, it's like, that's the word. That is exactly the word. Because it's like a gladiator, get in there and rumble and let things be. The way I describe it is it's this tolerance for messiness. It's this tolerance for imperfection, and that's really high where imperfection is safe, and you don't have to be that. And so there's two big standouts. One of them is on your team and the way you lead, because here's the reality: is most of the people that join your team they're going to join because they've got a part of their life that's just really messy. I mean, this isn't the perfect little corporate American. You walk in and you get a salary and you show up and you work 8 to 5. And I mean, these are people that they're usually in pain when they come to you and they're saying, I want to spend more time with my family. I'm financially I'm drowning financially. I feel unresolved, like I'm not fulfilling my purpose in life, and there's more to what I want to do than what I'm doing. And so inherently, as people come into your teams, they are inherently messy, and so recognizing that and dealing with, and if you have the ability to unlock, despite their flaws, if you have the ability to unlock that potential, you'll crush it, and it's something that corporate America isn't particularly adept at. So you have this massive competitive advantage because corporate America, it is so politically incorrect to talk about stuff that's messy. Everybody paints on your happy face and you go to work and you don't ask and you don't tell and it's like you separate your work life, or you separate your life into compartments, and you don't drag one compartment into the other. But the reality is you can't do that. That's what they're asking is impossible. The second thing is with your customers, because you're dealing with stuff. I mean, there's a few things like it's okay. There's no shame in talking about not sleeping well at night. And so consequently, even as people are talking about doTERRA products, we talk about the surfacey stuff. Like we love talking about lavender and peppermint because it's like who talking about having more energy and talking about sleeping better. Those are easy, low-hanging conversations, but we start getting into, even just little things like digestion and talking about, man, it's so inappropriate to talk about, man, my stomach, I've had so much gas lately that is like, oh, that's way too much information. People, so most of our health stuff that we have, unless we're talking to a doctor, and even then it's like pulling teeth to get us to go see a doctor, we just kind of bottle it up and kind of assume we're dying or that we might be really sick, but we can't talk about it. It's not safe. There's not safe environments to say, I don't know if this is normal. I don't know. I don't know if I'm broken. I don't know if I'm messed up. I don't want to talk to people about this because it's embarrassing, or I want to be seen as healthy. And so on the customer side, we have this amazing opportunity as we create safe places for people to talk about what's going on and what's happening and practice and play with and experiment with things to try and solve the problems that they're facing, their moodiness or their pain, whatever it is. It's something that we tend to hold close to our vest. It's not and I think there's two great opportunities that as you go out and you create a space where people can talk to you about things they don't talk to other people about. It creates there's a competitive barrier that you can take advantage of that everybody else from any other oil company or any other nutritional company, that if you're willing to go do the deep work, you have a significant competitive advantage over all the people that aren't. And that's the vast majority of people. So and part of the stigma in this industry is one of, I have to pretend like I'm successful, like I'm healthy, like I can't disclose any of my stuff, because how can you sell this health solution? And how can I be 50 pounds overweight and sell weight loss? So we put on this face and we draw and we go out of our way to look like we're the reality is, so I'm a psychology guy. The reality is it's our flaws, it's our cracks that attract other people to us. We're attracted to people that can say, "Oh, I struggle with the same thing. I've had a really hard time with that." And I feel really insecure at times. And I am always asking myself, am I really a leader, or am I just faking it? Is this even real? I mean, when I can talk like that to someone that has that same issue, that same question, and they can say, "Oh my gosh, so So it's not just me. So you're as successful as you are. It's cool. Andy and I have a chance to talk regularly about, and we joke a lot, and we also get into some really deep stuff. And it's really interesting because the same insecurities that a lot of new people that are starting off in doTERRA that are they're wondering if they can do it. Andy and Natalie, this will shock you, but they'll have the same stuff. And there's times when they're like, are we frauds? I mean, Andy and I have had that conversation multiple times, just because it kind of creeps in. And when you're so invested in trying to, in acting like that's not ever the case, you become completely unrelatable to all the people that are wondering if do I really even matter? Is this, right?
Totally. How about if we lay a little groundwork on, because I know, I think most of the people here have been exposed to some Brene Brown work and vulnerability conversation, okay. But I just want to share a slide that gives a good definition.
Yep.
So Brene Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So I love that definition because it's really about putting yourself out there when you don't know what's going to happen. It's being willing to share your story and expose weakness, expose naivete or just choices that could be judged or misinterpreted. And I think
I love her in the middle of that. I love her the concept of it's a willingness to wake up and love somebody that may not love you back.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of
yep.
always trying to earn love, just say I'm gonna love you regardless of what you do.
Right.
That's awesome.
Totally. It's like when you've coached and mentored with us, you talk about this idea of going first, right? Like you don't wait and say, well, if they do this, then I'll show up this way. It's like, no, I'm just gonna be, and I'm not gonna measure.
Yeah, and I talk about going first. The other thing I talk about in large degree, it's being unconditional. So yeah. What other people are doing is not the condition by which you act. And so if you're kind, that means that if someone's rude to you, you're kind. And if they're kind to you, you're kind. And if they're ignore you, you're kind. And it's so much easier in life to just say, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to be. And it's scary because the fear is, if I'm just kind all the time, even if they're mean to me, I give permission for everybody to be mean to me.
Yeah.
And the reality is it just, there's going to be people that are just mean to you. And it has less to do with you than it does that they're probably just mean. And that's their way of being. And so why in the world would you let that run your way of being? But it's that, that's a lot of the vulnerability is the willingness to act without regard to what the other person is going to do or say or feel, and knowing that you're taking risk, you're risking putting your heart out there and being rejected.
Totally. So maybe one of the things that I find really helpful in defining what vulnerability is to talk about what vulnerability is not. So I know that in her books, she talks about these 6 myths of vulnerability. One of them is that vulnerability is weakness. You mentioned this earlier, right?
Right.
I think especially for men, like that's just ingrained in us, like,
And you can only see it's blown up, so you can only see the middle, at least on my phone. You can only see number 3.
Yeah.
On the screen. Okay.
That's the 6 myths.
Okay.
And then number 2 is I don't do vulnerability, right? Like somehow that's for them. That's not.
I'm not wired. I'm not wired like that.
Yeah. Right. and somehow that there's another way, there's another path, which is kind of related to number 4, which is you can engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. So I can really make a deep connection with people and have wide open, meaningful interactions without vulnerability. And or the
Andy,
with it.
I'll give you a great example of, and if there's guys on this call, I'm guessing there are. One thing that shocks me is how many guys dive into this conversation. So in the rumbles we've done, we have even though there's a lot more women in doTERRA, but that are actively involved, we're running like 50-50 on. I mean, there's a lot of men that are saying, "Hey, we have gotten left out of this conversation to a large degree." And I spent most of my life. I spent most of my life thinking, because I'm very, very smart and I get ideas quickly and I'm good at communicating and I am very analytical and I've always seen that even from the time I was a child that was my strength. That's when my parents seemed to appreciate me. That's when I got good grades. I mean, I thought my smartness, my intelligence was my strength. I had this other side of me that was very emotional. When I was about 10 years old, I remember I read Where the Red Fern Grows, and I spent 3 weeks when little Ann and Big Dan died, the dogs died. I was in fetal position for like 3 weeks. I mean, I came home from school every day and I crawled underneath my bed because I was so embarrassed about how, I just bawled my eyes out. I could not get over these dogs dying. And so I went, and I had this really interesting experience. And eventually though, as I learned, hey, that's actually my strongest side. When I lead from that perspective, then everything I do lots better. So, and a lot of that is what we're talking about, owning that part of us that we're, don't like.
So that's one of the topics that came up at our first Rumble was that emotions, in this broad sweep, emotions are bad. That if we let emotions run us, then it just goes out of control. We can't hear you, Brett. Are you?
I'm here now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of related. So like, what's your coaching on the role of emotions? Like you're saying that your sensitivity with your strength. What have you found there?
Well, what I found is I integrated all of it. So my sensitivity was my strength, and when I led with that, and when I could listen to people and I could get into the messiness, and I find myself regularly in talking with clients, and they're telling me something that's emotional, and my intellect is like the bonus. That's the thing that because I can sit with them and cry with them, and they feel heard, and at the same time I can help them walk through it and see things differently, because it's the other side of that. When I try and exclude all the one side and make it just logical, I lose everything. I lose all the power that goes with that. Right. And so that's as we become more integrated, as we take the even the what we see as flaws, as we take that and use it as and we dive into it and we're okay with it, we often find that there's a part of us that it's like another cylinder in the engine that clicks on, because there's those same things allow us to connect with others and relate to them and have empathy and to with them, and the ability to do that forms the leadership environment that you have. It's that's the biggest strength part.
Yeah, I love that. When we were doing the mastermind in Hawaii, one of our leaders from Australia, who's on the call with Zach, he said, you know what this really boils down to is holding space. Like holding space for people to share the dark and the ugly stuff, and holding space to go into the dark unknown places, and holding space for talking about the health stuff that's taboo. It really comes down to that holding space.
Well, it shifts the conversation fundamentally from a business perspective, because it changes when you're not being vulnerable. What you'll want to talk about is what are you doing? So what are you doing in the business? What did you do today? How many people did you call? What did you say to them? You're going to just try and drive this doing thing. But what we don't know is that what we feel drives what we do. So our feelings drive our doing, and it doesn't. If we're feeling insecure, we're not going to make the 5 phone calls. We're not. It doesn't matter how much you motivate them. It doesn't matter when you're getting constantly disappointed. And so it changes the questions from, so what did you do today, to, so tell me what's going on. What are you feeling right now? As you wake up and you start thinking about making phone calls, what are you feeling? And if you deal with that, and that's a much deeper approach. That's the vulnerable approach.
Right.
Because then you start getting, I don't feel like I can do this. I don't feel like I have any value to add. And if I'm dealing with those issues, if I get them feeling like they have value to add, if I work through that messiness, they'll make the phone calls. They'll do the activities and the things they need to do. It's the feelings we have that slow us down and cause so much friction that it's like just running through mud in life. And anyway.
Yeah, it reminds me of reducing drag, right? Like we put so much focus on, well, you gotta get new enrollments, you gotta build to the next rank, but if you could just reduce the drag of all these underlying emotions around fear and then that's really that creates way more growth potential and connection potential.
Well, you guys gave feedback, and someone else to Catherine, to my wife, who's really, really loves this. She's doTERRA is her life, and she's just been building and but she's frustrated because it hasn't translated yet. And someone sat down, one of her leaders, and we work with Natalie and Andy, and as they sat down and they looked at all of her people and they looked at her stuff and they said, okay, you do not have a building problem, you have a depth problem, because you have all these people and all these great people, but they're all underperforming. They're none of them are just catching on fire and lighting up, and it's been interesting because the last couple of weeks, as she's slowed down and said, I got to quit finding new people and burning through them, and I got to start like really digging in with the ones I've got, because she's got a silver organization with a blue diamond team. I mean, she has enough people to be blue diamond, but she's silver and that's the price of not playing like this.
Right.
You get the least from people, you get the minimums from them instead of the heart and soul, willing to march into battle and do whatever it takes, which is that's the secret. Right.
I think that's connected to the third myth, which is I can go it alone. A lot of times leadership,
Can you please get me water, Daddy?
it's all, you see the one leader up on stage and you think that's what leadership is. They did it themselves. But there's no other business model like network marketing.
Daddy, can you please get me water?
It sounds like you'd like some water.
Sounds pretty vulnerable to me, Andy.
Can you go ask Marilyn for some water?
I want you to get me water.
Wow. I love getting water. So
that's funny.
Water, Daddy.
Okay. I might get to go get him a drink of water.
Let me talk for just a little bit, Andy, and you go.
Okay.
Why don't you go get him a drink?
Okay, great.
I got you. I guess a couple of interesting. So I touched on that. If you didn't catch it, if you want to write down something from this call, one of the Randy and I were talking about this. Vulnerability is a really tough subject because what is vulnerable right now? The things that I'm afraid to tell people, the things I'm afraid to disclose about what's going on, that is something that's really vulnerable. As I share that, and as it gets kind of into the public, a couple of words that are common, they're commonly confused as being similar to vulnerable is being humiliated or embarrassed. And there's kind of different levels. So vulnerability is driven by shame. The key distinction that shame has that none of those other words have. So there's shame, there's on kind of above shame is humiliation, and then there's embarrassment and maybe guilt on top of that, or humiliation, guilt, embarrassment. And there's kind of these different levels of this feeling of, I'm so, I don't feel worthy. The difference between those other words though, and the shame word is that humiliation means other people know about it already. It's something that happened, and humiliation is often what shame would feel like when other people find out. But then there's this thing that happens when the thing with humiliation and embarrassment is that those things resolve themselves. Eventually they resolve themselves, and they soften over time. It's like, oh, this is so embarrassing. This thing, or this was so humiliating that this happened. But over time, they usually get to a point where you can even look back and laugh about them, or you could tell people about them, and it's different. What keeps shame connected with the emotion of shame, and what keeps shame, and what makes it so it never ever resolves itself is that by its nature, shame is driven by lack of disclosure. It's this thing that I hold inside, and the thought is, if other people knew this about me, if they saw this part of me, here's what they would reject me. They wouldn't want to be around me. They would run, whatever it is that's going on. And it's the nature of that unresolvable human emotion that as the more we do, the more successful we get, the better things are, that the shame grows right with it under the surface, and the fear that accompanies the shame. And it never ever, time is not the friend of shame. It is of all the other things, but not shame. And vulnerability is about basically converting shame into what may feel initially like humiliation or embarrassment. But then as it grows, once it gets the air, once it's out in the open and it's breathable, and all of a sudden it starts to transform, and time then becomes your friend. And what was once, something that today it would be completely vulnerable to disclose or talk about, a year from now, you'll probably talk about it openly and easily with no emotional connection. And in fact, at that time, that doesn't necessarily isn't vulnerable anymore for you, because you're comfortable with it. It's what it is. And so, it's kind of a moving target. It's vulnerability is a willingness in the moment when you're thinking, ooh, I feel this thing and I don't want to talk about that. I want to fake it or pretend like that's not there, or just pretend like everything's okay. Vulnerability really is in those moments, a willingness and having it be a trigger where you say, well, the fact I don't want to talk about it means I got to talk about it, because I and it's not about sharing all the messy details of everything with everybody. It is about saying, man, I feel really insecure right now.
So what if we give everyone the chance to have an experience with this content, and maybe think about something that
Daddy, I want to sit on your lap.
Oh, okay, great. What's a an experience that you've had or something that you've done that you would not want your doTERRA leaders to know. And we're not asking you to post it in the chat box. We're not asking you to go post on Facebook. We're just so you can have an experience with what we're talking about here. What's something about you, or another question is, what's the biggest fear? Or what are the words that you fear hearing the most from your core leaders? So those words might be something like, you're not a real leader, or you're just doing this for yourself. This is all about you. Or you don't deserve to be a leader in doTERRA. So take just a minute and reflect on what's your biggest shame trigger right now.
This is that uncomfortable silence that usually precedes vulnerability.
So if you've got a journal, if you've got a place to take notes, go ahead and write those down. Let's see, we've got Marie asking if we should share. Do you want to come on, Marie? And we could do a walkthrough of a little Rumble. Marie, I'm going to bring you on as a panelist. I think it'd be useful if we could all just kind of demonstrate kind of what we're talking about. Hi, Marie.
Hey.
How are you?
So good.
Hi, Marie.
Hey, Brett. So
We've done this before.
That's why I'm like, wait, are we just staying in our heads with this? Hey, Amy. So interesting because we do this, but I had a top line call with my leaders a week after we did the Rumble with you guys, and I just got really real, and I just said, I'm probably just a crappy leader. I'm kind of in my head about things. I never asked any of them to participate in yearly things like planning the year or stuff. Do you know what I mean? So it was interesting, but so a couple of years ago, I'll just get really real. A couple of years ago, Emily Wright called me into her office, and Emily Wright calling you into her office is a pretty big deal, right? And she actually got really real with me about what my leaders say about me to her. And some of it was really hard to hear. I was just like, oh my gosh, really? And so, it was an opportunity for me to look and get vulnerable with myself. And one of the things that she said is I can be generous, and then I can pull back that generosity. And so I started to look at some of my generosity, and it was based on like if they do something, but then it was in my terms of if that didn't work, then I was cutting it off. And that was really hard for them. And so it was really interesting for me to sit in Emily Wright's office and to hear some of those vulnerable things that could bring shame kind of for a minute, I had that like little shame cone on that you put on the dogs, you know? And I felt like it was really public, but it was actually really real for me. And to really step back and look at how I led, if you could call it that, but how I really wasn't leading. And that was a big thing for me. And so as I gathered together with our top leaders and got them on a call this a few weeks ago, I said to them, I don't want to lead like I've led. You know, if you guys were to choose in again, would you choose to do this again with me? Or would you look for a different leader? And that was a really hard question that I think Brene, you asked that, Andy, and Brene asked that. Would they follow you again? And I don't know, that was me just getting really vulnerable with them. So
how was that received, and what was your experience?
Well, I don't know. One of my leaders is on. Amy, ask her. Actually, I got a couple of texts from them, and one of them was from my sweet leader, Cindy, and she said, the thing that I love about you is you've never been perfect and you've never tried to be, but you're real, and we see that there's this humanness about you, and I love you so much today, right now. And it was actually, I felt received really well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think that was a really hard Zoom for me to do. That was not easy. You know, Brett, when you say that I don't want to do this, I don't want to talk about this, then yeah, I needed to, right? So there you go.
Awesome.
Well,
thank you. Go ahead, Brett.
And it changes the rest of the conversation. I was in a board meeting with an executive team about 3 weeks ago, and it was interesting because their results were really bad as a team. And as I talked, it was, there was like these little backstabbing things that kept coming up, and they would say, the salesperson would say, yeah, I'm out there, I'm working with people, I just hope, I'm kind of waiting for production to catch up so that if I can make a commitment that we fulfill what I committed to. And then production would have this little jab, and they're going back and forth, but they're talking a lot about external things and how the market, and they're just, and they said the right words. And finally, after about an hour of listening, I interrupted the conversation. I said, all right, here's my feedback. You guys don't trust each other. And until you can at least acknowledge that and talk about that, we won't ever solve the problem. You're dancing, you're just solving the wrong problem. And a gal said, one of the ladies on the team, she said, I think not trusting each other, I think that's a little bit harsh. I wouldn't use that word. I think that sometimes we're not quite sure what the other person is going to do, but I think we trust each other. We really like each other. And I said, I agree you like each other, but you don't trust each other. And you just proved my point, because I threw out this word that was kind of harsh, and you're trying to reel that back in so fast and trying to soften it and make it a nicer word. And because you don't trust these folks that you can have that conversation and that there's not going to be blowback and a retaliation. And she kind of exhaled, and then the leader of the team said, trust is the right word. You're right. And I don't trust sales. I don't trust that they're going to go out and do the business. And so I'm reluctant to commit more resources and to do the things we need to do in production. And like for the next 15 minutes, we had the most real conversation, because the groups, like you could feel everybody exhale and say, okay, so let's talk about what's really going on for me, and the things I'm afraid of, and the things I'm frustrated with, and the things I don't trust. And we put that one way of saying, you don't trust each other. And the team in 15 minutes did a complete 180, because they started dealing with the real issues. They started talking about, you committed on this and you didn't deliver your commitment, and it made me embarrassed. And because I told the client we would deliver this, and you guys let me down. And I am really reluctant to promise anything now. And when people said, okay, I totally get that. That makes sense. That explains, all of a sudden that explains the whole performance by the sales guy, you know? And then when the production guys are saying, I don't have any resources. So I got guys working 80 hours and staying home, and they're not because we care, but we don't have enough resources. And so I'm reluctant to try and change anything or take on more work because I don't feel like the company's going to give me the resources I need to, and I can't add more labor on my guys. I can't do it. And all of a sudden we're, you know, the 2 hours before that, we did more in the next 15 minutes than we did for 2 hours of dancing around the issues, trying to come up with some silver bullet solution that was going to solve everybody's problem. That's what happens when you drop into the vulnerability.
So one of that's takes us to the next myth, that trust comes before vulnerability. So talk to us about that, Brett. Like, what's been your experience about where trust really comes from?
Well, I've done lots of work with trust, and so trust. Where I've arrived, and I'm open that I'm wrong on this, but my experience is trust is a byproduct of making clear agreements with people and then keeping your agreements. And so often as you find the breakdowns, as you're vulnerable about the insecurities and you're dealing with the real issue, what happens, a natural step that comes up is the ability for people to make commitments to each other, to say, okay, you don't feel heard. You don't, when you're talking to me, you think I just blow right past your questions and that I don't really care. So here's what I'm going to do when we're talking, and here's the agreement I want to have with you. And it allows us to, and it's through the agreements with people and through the changes and that trust is a natural byproduct of that. And so when I'm not dealing with reality, it's impossible to make real agreements. Everybody kind of implies things and does the dance. And as we start becoming vulnerable, it gives us an opportunity to make clear agreements with each other to, I'll give you, so here's a vulnerable example. That changed my conversation. So I'm talking with my wife a couple of weeks ago, and it's just kind of, the conversation is just deteriorating, and she's upset at me and she's saying just mean things. And then I'm firing back because she's saying mean things. And so we're just, we both have out our 6-shooters and she's blasting me. And then me firing back at her just reinforced, and she got meaner and I got meaner, and it just deteriorated. I'm sure that doesn't happen to you guys, but and it got really, it was really hard. And later on, we're driving someplace and we're both doing the silent thing in the car and we're not talking. And finally my wife says, you know what, when you come in and you do this, I'm really struggling right now because I've put on 10 pounds lately and I feel so unattractive. I have so much conversation going on about how you're not going to love me, and I'm not, I'm trying so hard to deal with that. And she said, I just want to feel like you love me. And even if I'm working on the weight stuff, I promise I'm doing that. I mean, now in that conversation, you guys, without me saying anything, you can tell, notice how that conversation is going to completely shift my conversation, which then, and as I come back and say, which is the truth, I didn't even notice. So if you tell me you gained weight, I didn't notice that. And I think you look awesome. And we started talking, and as I reassured her, as we went through the real, and as I'm able to then be vulnerable and say, when I'm working really hard right now, I'm working lots of hours and I'm busy. And when I come home and you just like unload on me, I feel completely unappreciated. And she's like, yeah, I got that. Now we're having this vulnerable conversation, and both of us can say, you know what, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that I just think you're, super, that you're attractive, and that I make sure, and I when I withdraw or check out or I'm tired, you don't get the wrong message. And last 2 weeks I've been super aware of that, and it's really changed things with us. And she's been super aware that when I'm tired that she's super supportive, and all that's really good for doTERRA, because she uses way more oils on me, and she's always saying, "Here, come here, let me rub your shoulders." And so everybody wins in that scenario. But that's what that shift, that pivot that happens when one person, one of the it's not on her list, is that both people have to be vulnerable. A lot of times we wait until the other person says something or does something, or at least is willing to be vulnerable. And if that's the case, it's not vulnerable anymore. It's vulnerability is when I go in without knowing what the other person's going to say or do. Because if she would have come in and said, "I am really self-conscious right now about my weight," and I would have come back and said, "Yeah, you should be. That's the fear, is that that's what's going to happen, and that all of the things she's afraid of turn out to be true, but that's what makes it vulnerable." So,
I love that. So let's go to the last myth about vulnerability, which is vulnerability is disclosure. So you and I, Brett, have a mutual friend who, if he gives up and gives a speech, in the first 5 minutes, the whole audience of thousands of people will know about his substance addictions, sexual addictions, with graphic detail. So is that vulnerability?
No. I mean, it can be sometimes, but here's one of the big challenges. This is we were talking about this before the call. There's something that looks really close to vulnerability, but it's really not. It's that fake. I do it. I say things for the effect. It's calculated. There's no risk in it. I've started so many stories with that, and I know what happens when I tell that story. I know people will react this way and they'll get emotional. A lot of us with our stories about doTERRA, what started off as this really vulnerable, authentic story at some point becomes this thing we're just telling and running through the story and going through the motions, and every word is planned, and I know how people are going to respond because there's no risk involved. It's just, I'm not up there thinking, "Oh, they might not like me, they might listen to me." I've done it 100 times. I already know they're going to all love me and cry afterwards. When I do it for that, it's not that you can't do that, but that's no longer vulnerable. Even though you're using words that sound vulnerable, you're talking about things that might be vulnerable. So vulnerable is this constant challenge. And as you get into Andy's position, you have vulnerability about different things, and so someone who's brand new in doTERRA might be vulnerable about, "I don't know enough stuff." Andy's vulnerability might get anybody to buy anything, whether they needed it or not. I know I have so much ammo and so much information that I worry sometimes if I lose the person, because I can sell so easily and recruit someone so easily because of my status. Maybe I abuse that. That might be the current vulnerability, even though his story is still talking about when he was, when he signed up for doTERRA, and all the vulnerabilities there may be a whole new level of it now. And so it's not about just going through and checking the box and telling people the facts or the things that you do. It's about sharing the stuff that's uncomfortable for you, and people know that. You feel it when someone is being authentic, and you can tell they're not really comfortable sharing this, but they trust you enough with their stuff that that often then that trust is reciprocated because they took a risk. So I don't know if that answered your question or not. But.
Totally. Yeah. And sometimes what looks like vulnerability is just shock value. It's
right.
It's very captivating. Like as this, we did this workshop, and and one of our leaders, patted me on the back, and he was like, "Good job talking about vulnerability. It's a sign of strength. It's really good topic." And I'm like, "Huh, I'm not sure if you got it, really got what we're talking about, because it's not about the show. It's about making a real connection and being willing to show up imperfectly and embrace the imperfect parts of where you are today, not just of your origin story, but your current feedback." Natalie and I got some feedback just last week from one of our leaders. He basically said that he didn't make it in doTERRA because we failed him, and that we don't live the principles that we teach. We put on this image of being, loving the world, and we just want to, bless and heal every home and put a healer in every home. And but he says that's a total fraud. You guys don't practice anything that you preach. And that was literally just 10 days ago. And we shared some of that at the Blue and Presidential Summit. I could weave that into a story, and I could spend lots of time crafting that story. And that was going to be one of my objectives, was to give you space to kind of to outline what your vulnerable story is. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the more structured it is and the more planned it is, the less vulnerable it is. There's actually an inverse relationship between how much it's planned and how raw and vulnerable we can be. So it's like Brett said, it's a moving target. It's more a way of being than it is an outline for a perfect speech. Brett, you look like you're about to say something.
No, I'm actually going to walk outside in the middle of this blizzard to get a charger because I'm on my phone and my phone is down to 15%. So that's the vulnerable truth right there.
Way to get raw. I love it.
So yeah.
So Natalie, yeah, I mean, so when we get feedback like that, Natalie and I are taking a look. We are really, really open. In fact, we've been processing a lot of other feedback that we've gotten, and getting some really good perspective on what it's like to do business with us, and to be in a business relationship, so we're not through it yet. We're still in the ugly part of that story. So I guess that's the next question is, what are the messages and the expectations that you set about vulnerability on your doTERRA team? As you coach, as you mentor, as you post on social media, what are the messages that you send about what's safe and what's not safe? What are the expectations that you set around vulnerability with your team? So take just a minute and journal about your team culture, right? How much is it safe, and how much have you modeled what it looks like to be vulnerable and authentic? So another question is, you know, in your doTERRA journey, when was the last time that you saw someone who really was brave in the face of uncertainty, of risk and emotional exposure? What are some role models that you've seen of vulnerability?
Andy, someone wants you to repeat that question.
So, so when was the last time you saw someone bravely facing uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? I'll type it in the chat box too.
And a great secondary question to that is that can connect the dots for you is when they did that, what happened with you? What did you feel? What part of you was unlocked, was given permission by their emotional exposure, so you can connect the dots between when that happens, what does it cause the other people to feel or say or do?
And the next thought question for you is, when was the last time you bravely faced uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? So when are times that you've shown that kind of courage and bravery and taken risk emotionally? And then the next question is when you think about how you want to show up and be seen as a leader, what do vulnerability and courage look like for you? So when you think about how you want to show up and be seen as a leader, what do vulnerability and courage look like for you? And I'd love to hear some of your ideas and thoughts on that last question. How do you want to show up in this space of vulnerability, and what courage looks like for you? So you can raise your hand and come on with us live, or post your comments in the chat box. So Marie says, real, raw, and open book, and generous unconditionally. Love that. Standing firm, says Amy. So what's one way that you're committed to be more vulnerable with your, first of all, with your prospects and your customers, and second, with your builders and your leaders? So again, what's one way that you're committed to being more vulnerable with your prospects and customers, and then also with your builders and leaders?
One of Brené's hacks, Andy, that's just a really great. I mean, that a lot of people mistake. A lot of people mistake this vulnerability for kindness and empathy, and there's parts of it that revolve around that. There's another whole component of this. You know, one of her big points, that there's one I subscribe to in life as well, is that clear is kind. And being unclear is unkind. And so as we see things, as we have, you know, we're talking with people, as we're giving feedback, as we're sharing, as we sugarcoat it and dance around the issues and just try and kick the can down the road, that oftentimes that's the most unkind thing we could do for another human being. And as people know that they can count on us to be honest and to see what's, you know, to say what's going on, as people know that, then it changes the relationship with them. So, you know, one of the behaviors is, you know, as you working with your team, an easy hack or an easy thing to focus on is being honest. You know, what they just said, being at times painfully honest. And coming from a place of love, because there's a lot of people that they disguise meanness and what they call it is, well, I'm just being honest. But when you love someone enough to tell them the truth, they rarely will take it badly, and I know that from experience. So, a lot of people on this call, I've told them truth that wasn't fun or easy, and as a result of that, then there's a feeling of trust or love that comes out of that you know, going through that hard stuff with people makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, the thing that to me, it's about creating a culture of accountability, and so when we come from that space of love and we give honest feedback, it sends a really clear message that we expect people to be accountable for their stuff. And so when I first met Brett, that's what blew me away about this training, was how it was the first time that I felt like there was a community with absolute integrity in that sense, like just authenticity and like commitment to truth.
Okay, I got to tell you, I got to tell you an Andy story. So I met Andy 10 years ago, as he said, and I had just, I'm a speaker and I've just written a book and you know, life's going great. And then I got divorced and I went in this, I was so embarrassed and ashamed about that, because in my mind, it's like, if I couldn't figure out, I did not let myself off the hook, because I'm like, I teach this stuff. I coach people. How can I have this catastrophic failure like this? And so I didn't train for 5 or 6 months. I just kept letting someone else do it, because they'd bring in a trainer from out of state to train this training. And because I felt so insecure about speaking in front of a group and talking about the stuff I talk about with all the messiness in my life. And the first training I came back for, Andy was in the training. He was one of 100 and some people in this training. We got all the way through the training, and I was just terrified the whole time that someone would know about my personal life and someone was going to ask me. And we get to the very end. I'm at the end of the training. I'm like breathing this sigh of relief. I'm like, oh, I can't believe it. It didn't come up. And then I opened up for questions, and I said, does anybody have any questions? First hand up is Andy. and Andy's hand goes up, and he said, I have a question for you. So you write books and you teach all this stuff about how to love each other and all that. How the heck did you get divorced? It was like, oh, that's like the worst. That was the one I was more afraid of than any other question. And I kind of gave him a softball answer, and Andy said, no, what's the accountable version? Tell me the accountable version of how you got divorced. You've been teaching about accountability for 4 days. And it's like, oh, dude. And it was really cool to be able to be vulnerable and share what was going on and all that stuff. And then at the end, I'm afraid everybody's going to say, oh, this whole training is a bunch of crap. And Income, he's one of my closest friends. And he asked the hard questions, and as I asked hard questions, it kind of defines our relationship. And it's directly contributing,
So we just had a bad connection there for about 20 seconds. I think what Brett was saying is that he just has a lot of respect for me. He really thinks I'm one of the greatest. I think that's what you said, isn't it?
That is basically the gist of that whole story, yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I just never, seriously, like the level of accountability I had never experienced before. And so I couldn't pass up the chance to hold Brett accountable to what he was teaching.
Yeah, you did.
So Bridget.
And I appreciate it.
Bridget is asking, how did you answer the question?
Oh, not that one again.
She asked it this time, not me.
Yeah, I saw you typing. Bridget, ask Brett. Ask him the question again. I said that there was, actually, the way I answered the question was that one of the things I've learned is that I had this need to dive in and save people. And it affected, when I got married, it kind of affected that. And I saw in life, I do that a lot, that I see other people that are in need, and rather than look at my own stuff, I love to dive in and save people. And it was just this pattern in my life. And usually it didn't turn out good for me when I did that. And kind of as a result of that, I've shifted a lot of things, and I still do a lot of good for people. But I have this like trigger now that when I start diving in to save somebody, I had to learn that in doing that, I hold them as weak and not capable. And so I did that to a large degree with my wife, as I was very much about saving her and hearing her, feeling bad for her story and all of her circumstances and all the pain. And as a husband, it's really, really difficult to coach someone and save someone inside of a marriage. So it just doesn't work well. And so that was a tough lesson about saving people.
Wow.
So,
thanks for saying
that. I think that was my answer back then too. So.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Brett.
All right. Well, that's about it for this call, right?
What were you saying? You said that you know that it's vulnerable if it's uncomfortable, and if there's still some discomfort, right? Like some anxiety around going there.
Yeah, just that. They're touching a part of me that they're kind of touching through my armor here a bit, and that's the feeling. And it's
Yeah.
like C.S. Lewis. There's a story in one of C.S. Lewis's books, and the lion is standing looking at his reflection in the water, in a pool of water, and the dragon is standing next to him, and the dragon is saying, "I don't like these scales. I don't like these scales." And the lion's like, "Well, what are you gonna do about it?" And the dragon starts scratching and clawing, but every time he like claws off one layer of scales, there's another layer of scales below it, and the dragon's getting frustrated because he thinks, man, there's no end to the scales. And so the lion takes his claw and takes one of his claws, and he cuts right through the chest of the dragon, I mean, all the way down to where there's blood. And the lion says to him, "So if you want to get rid of the scales, you have to cut much deeper than you're cutting." That, like, scraping around on the surface and trying to figure out how to sound vulnerable and how to look vulnerable. It's like, no, it's pretty much a willingness to go all the way to the core, where it feels like you're emotionally bleeding. And then when you get there, be willing to go deeper if there's more. But when you feel kind of, that's often how it feels when you first engage in this vulnerability conversation. And I mean, it feels like you're going to, your whole world will crumble. And then as you find out it doesn't, there's this other thing that starts to happen. There's this shift in you and in others that is like, it turns on a dime. It starts to change things. So anyway, that's my experience of how it works.
I totally agree. In fact, there's another C.S. Lewis quote that I wanted to share. To love it all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. You want to make sure to keep it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. So I love the story of C.S. Lewis's life and his marriage to Joy and that, that rocky road and his learning what it means to be vulnerable. And it's just the path. And I think I love this teaching when Brene Brown was meeting with some interpreters, the American Sign Language interpreters, before one of our events. They asked her, are there some words that you're going to be using often in your presentation to make sure we've got those down? And she was like, well, yeah, vulnerability. I'll be talking about a lot. And so they're like, okay, the sign for that is this. So weak in the knees was their sign for vulnerability. And she's like, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing. And they're like, well, there is this other word. It's another meaning of vulnerability. And this is the sign, right? It's taking and bearing the heart, exposing the heart. And she was like, yes, that's it. And what Brene has found is that vulnerability looks like this in others, but it feels like this to us. So it looks like strength and courage and bravery to others, but to us, it feels like total weakness and I'm going to die.
Andy, I thought that was the sign for I'm at Mardi Gras and I want beads.
Well, that's the same thing. Yeah, that's what vulnerable really is.
Yeah. Okay.
Love it. Let's see, there's one other quote here. Let me just put that up on the screen. So courage and vulnerability, we often think are these two separate things. And because it just feels like rotten going through vulnerability. It doesn't feel good. Like we see pictures about, we see posters about courage, and we watch movies about courage, and we watch Braveheart, and it looks exciting and amazing, but it feels like you're walking on lava. And so I love what Brene Brown says. They're not mutually exclusive. They're actually, the courage is the way to get to vulnerability. You have to walk through vulnerability. It is the path.
And Andy, the only reason in movies that vulnerability, that courage looks so sexy is because in the movies, we always get to see the ending.
Right.
And it's not till the ending that all of a sudden the courage is like, oh my gosh, that was so cool what they did and what they achieved. But when it started, the things that happened at the beginning where you couldn't see the ending, and they were taking a big risk, and they could lose everything. And a lot of times they could lose their life. They could lose everything. And at the end, when they win and they get the girl, or they defeat the oppressor, or whatever the storyline is, then and only then do we say, oh, this was worth it. This was so good. But when you're in the front end of it, when you don't know the outcome, and you're taking a risk that could have severe consequences in your mind, then that's the courage part, and the vulnerability. But in movies, we always see the ending, and it's the ending where we resolve it and say, oh, that was so cool. That was just the right thing to do. But it didn't feel like that in the beginning of the movie. Yeah,
totally. So Brene Brown talks about this process of armoring up, right? Or assembling your armor. So we, at a young age, we're taught that it's not safe to take emotional risk. We get made fun of, or we get, it gets used against us, or we get taught certain things like that it's just not worth taking emotional risk. So that armor, rather than protecting us, it actually prevents us from growth, from connecting with others, from being seen. And so we go into this space of fear, this emotion that drives self-protection, and it becomes this almost routinized pattern of putting on the armor. It usually starts out with the belief, I'm not enough. Then when the brain goes to I'm not enough, it almost has to find someone or something to project it on. So we often go to, you know what, if I'm honest, no one else is vulnerable. So why should I put myself out there? Screw them. I don't see them being honest. I don't see them talking about their fears, and I know they've got issues. And then we go into total victim. It's actually their issues and shortcomings that make me act this way. This is their fault. They're trying to blame me. And the comparison, I'm actually better than they are. So this pattern of assembling your armor, there's a lot of things that start that process, and it's different for everyone. So I want you to think about what are some situations that lead you to armoring up. What are, especially in your doTERRA space, is it Is it someone calling you a liar? Or is it someone calling you selfish? Or someone calling you out when you make a mistake? Think about what are some.
It may be as simple as someone saying no.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to be on your team. We may go into tailspins, right?
Exactly. Yep. No, I don't want to buy a kit. No, I don't do MLMs. Like, what are?
I don't believe in oils. Yeah, I don't believe in oils.
Right.
Right.
So take just a minute and journal about a couple of situations that are reliable at triggering you into armoring up. So what are the two situations that lead you to this process of putting on shields and shutting others away out? And I'd love to hear some of your responses too, if you'll post those in the chat box. So Amy posted a couple of people that are reliable triggers for her. I'll bet that most of you have some people that you simply will not answer their phone calls, or you won't be in a social setting with them, or you won't go to a family reunion because you're so reliably triggered by them. And the default response is to armor up. So Catherine says, when reasonable boundaries are violated, then you don't feel safe. So the next question is, what does this armoring up process look like for you? Is there predictable language? Are there certain words? Is there a thought pattern? If you think about being a transformer, right? Like you literally shift from being open to being closed, from being kind to being harsh or judgmental. So think for a minute about what your armoring up process looks like for you. So any questions, or would anybody be willing to hop on with us and kind of talk through what that armoring up process looks like for you? Katie.
Hi, I'm driving, so sorry about that.
You're
Hopefully
great.
You guys can hear me okay.
Yeah.
So for my armoring up, I get really strong and like can become more domineering. Like this has to happen for like it blocks the emotional vulnerability and tenderness that I'm actually feeling. And I go into like the very protective, like you don't get to hurt me, you don't get access to this softness. That's probably my main go-to when it comes to armoring up.
Awesome. Great awareness. So how often do you catch yourself in the armoring up process? Like, how often are you conscious of that happening while it's actually happening?
I think recently I've been very conscious of it, but I wasn't conscious of it until about a month or two ago, and that's when I realized what I was doing. But now I'm conscious of it. It doesn't mean I always choose to not go there. So I'm still working through all of that.
Awesome. That's a great awareness. And what a gift is to be in choice as it's happening, right? Like,
Yeah.
to know that, okay, this is the path I'm heading down. I can choose to redirect. And I think when we get to the next level, we can even talk about it in the moment and say, okay, I'm feeling really triggered right now, and I love the language that Brene uses. The story that I'm telling myself is X, right?
Right.
Just that ability to go into perspective taking instead of just straight up reaction.
Right. Yeah. I recognize in myself that there's, there are key stories that cause me to go into that. And also what I'm making an effort to do right now is to just be still when I get triggered that way so that I can filter through what's true and what's a story so that I can consciously be able to choose the direction I want to go without it just being all the self-talk or, all the harmful, negative things. But I want to come from a place where I'm choosing and I'm creating what I want, and I don't want the subconscious stuff to control me. So that's where I come from with it, and I still am working through it. So I'm working through that right now, if I'm super honest. So
Yeah,
well,
it's a journey.
I'm figuring it out.
It's a process.
Yeah.
Brad, were you going to say something?
Sorry, no, I'm trying to not get in a car accident.
No, I'm listening.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Brett. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Katie. The body is actually this amazing tool that we have that gives us all kinds of warning signs, right? Like we're heading for a cliff. Like, Brett was talking about this conversation with his wife, and like that steam train is heading full steam for the cliff. And as we learn to identify, as we increase in emotional intelligence and start to identify, okay, what I'm feeling is not fun, it's not healthy, and it's not normal, like it's not my natural state, then it helps you step back and kind of take a step off the train. So we're not going off the cliff with all of our relationships. So it definitely takes practice, though. It's a lifelong process. So that leads me to the next.
Yeah, and I realize I'm not sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I realize for my, like that stand that you were saying, that for me, one of the things that I have developed over time is that making it through to the other side of what I choose to do is really important. Like I have felt this draw to be super successful in what it is that I choose to do. And because I, like if I'm not conscious of that, then I can allow things to happen in my life that causes me to take that harder stand and causes more chaos in my life than not. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and say what you were going to say.
No, that's perfect.
If you turn your phone around when you're talking like that, then you can talk and focus on what you're saying, and we'll watch out for stuff for you and tell you if you're going to run into something. Yeah.
Put it in the drive. Well, I'm
say, watch out, watch
right
out.
Now, so.
Oh, okay.
You guys are great.
So some of you may have heard of Joseph Campbell and the what's the hero's journey, right? And we all know the famous scene when Luke is getting trained in Star Wars by Yoda, and the training is going great, and then Luke looks over and sees this dark cave, and he asks Yoda, "What's in that cave?" And Yoda's response is, "In we must go." And the quote from Joseph Campbell, who's this master of storytelling, is that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. So just like we were talking about, the feedback that we fear hearing most and the shame triggers that put us into throwing up the armor are the caves that hold the treasure that we're looking for. That's our physiological, self pointing us towards the healing that it needs to resolve stuff from early in our life. It's the flag, it's the virus that's sending up these symptoms saying, "Hey, come fix me." And so whether it's mom stuff or dad stuff, whether it's self-image stuff, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. So that's why I love this work, is because it's a really reliable gateway to finding healing and wholeness. So I want to ask that question next. What is your cave? What's we've already talked about some of the feedback that you fear, or the interactions that are the most triggering for you. But what's your personal call to courage as a leader? Maybe some of you talked earlier about wanting to be more honest, and to just be to hold people accountable. So maybe one example is I want to be braver at giving constructive feedback. And then, so let's just take a minute and journal about that question. What's your personal call to courage as a leader?
It's funny how these things work, because often the very thing we're afraid of is that's the default. That's what we have. So the fear, I have someone on my team who's not producing, that's not productive or effective, and they're not doing anything. The fear is that if I push them, then I'll lose them. Or if I'm honest with them, I'm going to lose them. That might be my big fear, is that honestly, they're going to bail. And what I'm afraid of is I'm afraid of losing someone who I've already lost, who's not there, who's not productive. And so the whole thing is kind of an illusion, because what I'm most afraid of is already the default. And so rather than take the risk of, having the courage to at least say, my commitment as a leader is to be honest, no matter, even when I'm afraid of losing. It's funny how this is a side. One of the analogies I use a lot when I'm in my writing book is I use some of the psychology and thought process of gambling. And it's interesting is when people are playing blackjack and they're betting $2, often when they're betting $2, they can follow the book and they can say, oh, I'm going to hit the 16, or I'm going to make this thing that's hard because I might make a decision where I lose. Where I lose the hand. Then if when they bet $100 on a hand, it's funny because all the reasoning goes out the window, because they're so afraid and so the same calls that seem reasonable, logical when the stakes are low. When the stakes get higher, often we all of a sudden it just freaks us out, and we come up with this completely different approach that almost ensures our loss, because the approach is fatally flawed, but it feels to us like it's not as risky. Often as you decide, what is this thing as a leader? What's my commitment? What can they count on? And it's one thing when the stakes are low, it's easy to be that. Where it's hard is when the stakes are higher, but the rewards are so much higher in those situations too. And as you're clear that I'm going to be this way no matter what, it actually becomes a lot easier. And you'll find that your own personal commitments, your own real rules, your own leadership contract becomes this kind of guiding thing. And even when you're feeling like, oh, this is a high pressure situation, high risk, the perception of that often causes us that's where we tend to break our own natural rules that we've set for ourselves.
I love that. So the next question is, what is the cave that you fear to enter and why? What's the cave that you fear to enter and why? So an example like you just gave, Brett, is this fear of losing someone, giving that honest feedback and losing them.
Yeah. Or maybe if I'm honest, I might hurt them.
Yeah.
No, it's Andy, this, with the work that I do that you know about and have talked about with the training stuff, I deal with lots of business owners, but I also deal with lots of really high risk people. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Often I'll have someone in the room, and what I know is that what they might share is that they attempted suicide 2 weeks ago. And I have this part of me then that locks up, like, oh, you don't want to push this one. You don't want to challenge this. This person's fragile, and if you might break them, and then what would happen? What if they committed suicide? What if you said something? And the problem is, the default is that's where they're at. Right. And if I pull back at that point, and perhaps the one thing that and from my experience, the thing that will get through is when you're like, okay, well, I'm going to treat you the same as I treat someone who's completely healthy, because I'm going to trust that my insights and my gifts and the things that I bring, that the best I can possibly show up is being me, just being me and saying what's truth for me. And often inside I'm screaming, because it seems like, oh, this is high risk. Maybe I should change my game plan and soften things and just sugarcoat and make it, just try and make it okay. And that would be like the most massive disservice I could ever do. Right. And it's terrifying though. It's terrifying because the stakes feel like they're higher. But not really.
Right. So, I saw some people posting questions earlier in the chat. And, a lot of them had to do with how can I know when to be vulnerable, when to like really, really go there with people. I'm trying to find the exact way they worded it. But Brett, what coaching would you give as far as like what are some just wise words about how much to disclose and when, how vulnerable to be with who, and do you know what I mean?
Sorry about that. My coaching would be that it's the inverse of whatever you're feeling and thinking. So at the times that you're telling yourself, oh, I've got to really be cautious here, I've got to tread lightly, I've got to risk, those are the times that require the most vulnerability and the most depth, and you'll get the best rewards out of vulnerability in that. And it's the times when it seems like it's easy and low, and it's easy to be vulnerable. Those are probably the times that requires the least vulnerability, is the times when it would be easy to be vulnerable. And so as you're gauging your fears and your insecurities, that when you're feeling insecure, that's the time to own it and say, man, I'm really afraid to have this conversation. I'm not sure. And the best way and the best approach to get into vulnerability, if you want an easy path into it, rather than dive into a bunch of personal stuff, vulnerability often starts by saying, so I'm feeling really right, by just identifying what's going on right now in this moment. Is a great entry. That's a great stepping stone into the bigger picture of vulnerability, of when I'm, often if I have a call, I've been avoiding it, I've been putting it off, or I feel like it's going to be hard or dangerous or risky. And often I will start the call by saying, I've been putting this thing off, and I don't know why I'm so afraid to talk to you. but I'm really nervous about this call. And it's funny because just that usually sets the stage for the other side. That, I mean, you start down this path, and then you end up in this really deep place. But it often starts just by identifying. When I'm coaching people, often we'll see things in another context. So we'll hear a friend talking, and they'll be talking about their relationship, and all of a sudden we'll see something that we're doing ourselves, and where we're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I do with my wife. I say the same thing. I can see this person's talking and sharing about how she feels when her husband does that, and I'm seeing what it feels like for my wife when I do that. And I'm seeing that. Often we don't know how to start the conversation. We don't know how to start that hard conversation. And what I found, and what I tend to coach people on, is just start with the thing that triggered you. Start with and so if I'm talking to my wife later on and I want to talk to her about this thing I'm seeing, I can say, listen, today I was at work and I heard one of the people in the office was on the phone, and they were sharing with someone about how hurt they felt about how their husband treated them. And for some reason, I just connected some dots and realized that I do that same thing to you. And so I want to talk to you about it, because I don't like that. I don't like that part of me. And when you can just go to the actual thing that happened or that triggered it or that you saw it, and be authentic, and don't start off by making up a story or if you, even to the point, if you're thinking about someone and you're thinking, man, they're way overweight, and it's been bugging me because I think there's some doTERRA stuff that would really help them. And often, but I don't know how to start a conversation with them. I don't know how to, and often the vulnerable conversation is to start and saying, I don't know why, but I keep thinking about you over and over again. I'm concerned about your weight and about your health. I'm really bothered that something bad's gonna, so I want to share some stuff, and I know you might not like it, and you might think I'm being nosy or whatever. I'm worried about that. I'm worried you're going to think I'm just trying to sell you stuff. And here it goes. That's a vulnerable way to talk about something that's uneasy. And sometimes it's like, you don't want to say, your weight stresses me out. If that's real for you, don't say it if it's not. But if that's what's really going on, my experience is that people will, at the end, even immediately, they're like, okay, I'm open, because what I feel from you is that you really care. I mean, you really care about me, and that's what's driving this conversation. And you'll have a different outcome, even though it's messy, and you're thinking, man, I don't want to offend them. I don't want them to think this. I don't want them to think that I'm, you have all these fears that are going on, but when you get clear on what's real is, I'm really genuinely concerned about this person. Be honest about it. That's my coaching.
Awesome. I love that. So
I'm reading the comments too.
Amy Carver says, well, crap. If we figure out this vulnerability stuff, then we never have to worry about getting hurt, right, Brett? Like we can become just invincible to pain, right?
It's foolproof. It's completely foolproof. Yeah. Everybody just does whatever you want at that point.
Awesome. So here's the physics of vulnerability. If we're brave enough, often enough, we will fall. It's really that simple. And I love, love, love this Roosevelt quote about the arena that Brett was alluding to earlier. At some point in your journey, you will be criticized. You will get judged. You'll get thrown under the bus. You'll get blamed. And ultimately, it's not the critic who counts. I'll just read the quote. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly. At best, he knows the triumph of high achievement. If he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So I guess the point of this is not that you become immune or invincible to failure, but that when you're face down in the arena, that you're able to get back up again and to face the feedback, to face the fear, and keep getting up. That's really what this is about. It's about resilience, and it's a way of being, rather than just creating a checklist of ways to get more enrollments or to win more influence. It's ultimately a way of being. So why don't we just open it up for questions here? Brett, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's at the end of the day, the problem again becomes that the default is failure. It's not success, and often we load the cards, and so we play it small enough and soft enough that we ensure the thing we're most afraid of, and the thing that holds us back from going for it. We ensure it instead of even giving ourselves an opportunity. And then the risk is we could go for it and fail. And what we tell ourselves is somehow that's worse than not really going for it and failing. And the truth between is that the second one is far more painful, because we always have to wonder, and there's nothing to learn when we haven't gone for it. And when we go for it and we fail, then the great thing is there's all kinds of things to learn, and just get up and you go for it again. And the failures don't accumulate in life, only the successes accumulate. And so you get up and you dust yourself off when you fail, but your successes accumulate. And a year from now, 2 years from now, even if you've had some no's and some people that told you suck, and despite all that, you'll also have an army of people who are inspired and who are living their potential more because of how you showed up, and they'll stay with you. That they will accumulate with you, and that's the goal. It doesn't even matter whether it's doTERRA or just life. That's makes life better.
Amen. So before we open up for questions, I just want to share an epiphany that I had. The training that Brett offers, the BU training, it is hands down the best experiential training on courage that I've ever found. So you can go to Tony Robbins events all day long. and you can read every book there is about doing hard things and having the attribute of courage, which, courage at the end of the day is really what forms resilience. It's what forms the successes, like Brett talks about. There's the default of failure, but what gets you through all those failures to success is just believing and courage. And so this training that he offered, that Natalie and I went through, you don't just learn about courage on a whiteboard. You don't just look at inspiring posters or do coloring books about courage. You're getting out of your seat and you're getting hands-on. Like, I'm going to push through the barriers. I'm going to break through the blocks, and you get to experience courage at levels that I've never felt before. You also get to plow through your own vulnerability and rumble with your not so pretty parts, and peel back all of the garbage and the pretending to be your authentic self. And so I just want to give a really shameless promotion of the BU training. If you want to experience courage, if you want to experience your brilliant self, go to BU training. The first part is only 4 days. It's actually just 2 part days and then 2 full days. I know that half the people on this call have already been through, but I just wanted to invite you, if you want to create this culture of courage and vulnerability, I can't think of a better way to start than through the BU training.
Thank you.
So why don't we open it up for questions? I see one question that Cheryl is asking. How can I get the workbook that I've been showing in the presentation? I just posted that at sharesuccess.com/rumble. So I'll post that here in the comments.
Yeah, then again, it could be, we could get you.
Brett and I have been talking about doing another live Rumble where it's much more experiential, and there's no hiding. Like, everybody gets to go through their stuff and really we bring it into the doTERRA conversation in a really practical way. So we would love to, we'd love to invite all of you to that as soon as we have a final date in February. And so if you want to download the workbook, or if you want to stay in the loop about the events that we're having, go to sharesuccess.com/rumble and just put in your email address, and we'll keep you in the loop and get you this workbook. And then we could also send you some of the graphics that I shared too, the posts.
Yeah, the main thing is if you get those posters up on your wall, you'll pretty much be there.
Yeah, you don't need to do hard things. It's really just pretty pictures. Brett and I have a running joke that if people have limiting beliefs, really the only thing you have to do is print out a coloring page and color it in, and you're good as gold.
Just color it out. Just color
it out. Yep. Baby step your way to breakthrough. So feel free to raise your hand or post any questions in the chat box. Otherwise, thank you, Brett, for taking the time to be with us and to share your brilliance. I know that I always learn something and come away more inspired and motivated to be more authentic with the world and to be more just transparent and more of who I really am. One of the things I've noticed on this path of vulnerability is I have never felt more alive. And especially in this world where it's pretty easy to get numb. You know, you go to a movie nowadays and the special effects and the noise and the foods and everything that we're bombarded with all day, every day, it's pretty easy to get numb. And I can tell you for myself that vulnerability has been the path to feeling what it feels like to be alive and to be connected and to stay open to others and to their worlds and to their perspectives. So thank you, Brett, for sharing, and thank you all for being on with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. So it's always fun to help people see potential and to be their potential. So
I've also Brett and I have also started a Facebook group, and I'll put a link to that on this sharesuccess.com/rumble so that you can have a community conversation, because I really do have a vision of a culture in doTERRA that is that's authentic and that's vulnerable. I believe that we're better than most network marketing companies out there, but that's not my standard. My standard is like let's create this culture of honesty, of integrity, and being our word, and not just on a surface level, but with our actions.
You're talking about coloryourwaytogreatness.com?
Yeah. Yep, coloryourwaytogreatness.com.
Nice, good. That's what I thought.
It's actually successmindset.com. So
yeah, abundancemindset.com.
That's right, abundancemindset.com. Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.